In the wake of the Khashoggi affair, President Trump has basically said that cancelling arm deals with Saudi Arabia would be like shooting themselves in the foot. How important are these deals between Saudi Arabia and the US?
Well, there's obviously a huge economic dimension at play with regard to the deals. We know that there's billions of dollars at stake with regard to the trade between the two states. And if we look back to the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's recent trip to the US, he spent a lot of time trying to get a couple of these deals over the line. He spent time with Mr. Trump in the White House with some rather awkward-looking documents that were sort of A3-sized pieces of paper outlining exactly what the Saudis were buying from the US. And so this is a really important deal for the US economy. Obviously, there are a lot of jobs tied up to that, and it's going to have a massive impact on the US economy if the US cancels these arms sales.
I mean, there are those that say the US could essentially use this as a bargaining chip with Riyadh to pressure them, if you will, into behaving differently. Is that something that could work?
Yeah, I think when you've got a relationship like the one between the US and Saudi Arabia, which dates back several decades to the end of the Second World War, it's a relationship that has had its ebbs and flows, it has its ups and downs, and you'd like to think that type of relationship could withstand a frank and honest conversation. Now, it's clear that what has happened recently with Mr. Khashoggi has had a massive impact on the global perception of Saudi Arabia. But let's not forget that Saudi Arabia's human rights record is pretty abhorrent. There's been a great deal of concern expressed with regard to the treatment of political prisoners and a number of other things. So I'd like to think that Mr. Trump and other Saudi allies, including the UK, including France, would be able to have open and honest conversations with the Saudis to express their concerns about the treatment of dissenters, about opposition groups, and about human rights in the kingdom. And I guess that arms deals, the capacity to sell arms to the Saudis, although it has a massive economic impact on those host countries and those selling arms, is certainly a massive carrot for the Saudis. If they want to continue buying the arms, then there could very easily be sort of objectives tied to that with regard to human rights and democracy.
I mean, so far, Mr. Mabana, it doesn't look like there'll be much movement when it comes to the US and Saudi relations. Let's say, for argument's sake, the US did cave into international pressure, putting more international pressure on Riyadh. Could we see Riyadh look at other arms exporters, for example, like Russia or like China, or is that unlikely to happen?
Well, I think that's the big concern for people. The argument is, what is more important? Is it the economic investment that you get from arms sales and the number of jobs that are created through arms sales? Or is it more about the search for human rights, the quest for human rights and dignity and treating people in a much more responsible way? And that, of course, is seen in the German decision to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia, particularly a certain type of arms that are used for combat. But the concern is, if we stop selling arms, if a certain state chooses to stop selling arms for in a quest to improve a human rights situation or to put pressure on a state, unless that ban is worldwide, then it's very easy to turn to a different state and say, we'd like to buy arms from you. And that would certainly be the concern, that whilst the arms trade is dominated by a number of states, it's not a complete monopoly. There are other alternatives to buying weapons from the US and from the UK. Now, the quality of those arms and weapons is not as good. That's certainly true, but there are options available.
I mean, when it comes to European countries, Germany is certainly leading the way in calls to ratchet up the pressure on Saudi Arabia. France hasn't been quite as forthcoming. Will we see the EU kind of standing together in terms of following suit for what Germany's doing?
Well, that's certainly what a number of Germans are calling for, a strong EU line against Saudi Arabia and against not only the treatment of Mr. Khashoggi, his murder in the consulate, but also about the brutal, devastating conflict in Yemen. And I think that's one of the things that has prompted the Germans to take this decision, because not only are they concerned about Mr. Khashoggi's death and the dubious way in which it's been framed by the Saudi officials, but they're also concerned that a number of their recent arms deals have included combat weaponry, including some tanks that are used explicitly for war-making purposes. And now there are concerns that these have been used in Yemen, much like there are concerns about UK weapons being used in Yemen. And that has had a devastating impact on the country, leading to a situation where almost 23 million people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. So I think that's really underpinning any German demands and urging for an EU response. But unfortunately, given the political wranglings within the EU, and particularly the tension between the EU and the UK, I don't think that will happen.
Okay.